Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are unpacking how the absolute greatest real estate bargain in global history wasn't actually some brilliant master plan, but rather a completely chaotic, accidental domino effect. You know, we usually think of history as a series of super calculated moves by geniuses playing 4D chess. But the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, it proves that sometimes world-altering, map-redrawing events happen simply because people are scrambling in a panic to solve a much, much smaller problem.
Just imagine for a second accidentally buying 828,000 square miles of land. That is essentially half a continent. And the United States acquired this unbelievably vast territory for roughly 3 cents an acre. 3 cents! It instantly shifted the entire global balance of power. It's just a staggering figure when you really think about it. We're talking about a young republic literally doubling its size overnight, not through a massive war, but through an incredibly unexpected transaction.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the accidental deal, then explore why Napoleon sold, examine the constitutional crisis it sparked, look at what we call the unintended harvest, and finish up with a new maritime rival. Let's dive right in.
Part 1. The Accidental Deal.
So here's the deal. President Thomas Jefferson didn't actually set out to buy a continent. He just desperately needed to secure the economic windpipe of the American West. And it was all about one single spot, the port of New Orleans. You see, American farmers living out west of the Appalachian Mountains had a massive logistical nightmare. Those mountains made it practically impossible to haul goods east overland, so they relied entirely on the Mississippi River to float their crops down to New Orleans for global shipping. Basically, whoever controlled New Orleans held the survival of the American West in the palm of their hand.
While the plot thickens in 1800 when France secretly reacquires this massive Louisiana territory from a much weaker Spain. Jefferson was, understandably, terrified of having a powerful French empire right on America's doorstep. He completely panicked, famously declaring that whoever held New Orleans was, quote, our natural and habitual enemy. I mean, talk about severe geopolitical anxiety for a young nation, right?
To fix this, Jefferson sends James Monroe to Paris with a very strict, very limited mandate. The goal? Offer $10 million for just the city of New Orleans and maybe a little slice of Florida. But when Monroe actually gets there, the French drop an absolute bombshell counteroffer on the table. They ask, hey, instead of just the city, do you want to buy the entire territory for $15 million? That is just a $5 million difference for 828,000 square miles.
Which brings us to Section 2. Why did Napoleon sell?
Seriously, why would one of history's most notorious conquerors just throw in the towel on North America? It seems completely bizarre and out of character for Napoleon Bonaparte to just hand over an empire at bargain basement prices. Well, to understand this sudden pivot, we have to look at 3 distinct, heavy geopolitical pressures that were closing in on France all at the exact same time. He absolutely didn't do it out of generosity. He did it out of sheer necessity.
It came down to a perfect storm. The collapse of his Caribbean dreams, a looming European war, and a desperate, immediate need for gold. Let's break these down to see exactly how they forced his hand.
First up, the Haitian Revolution. Napoleon originally envisioned this massive Caribbean sugar empire, right? And Louisiana was really just supposed to be the giant agricultural breadbasket to feed it. But the enslaved people of Saint-Domingue, who were brilliantly led by Toussaint Louverture, successfully revolted. Between their incredible rebel tactics and a devastating outbreak of yellow fever that just decimated the French army, Haiti won its freedom. Without that highly profitable sugar island, Napoleon simply had no use for Louisiana. His grand plan was totally dead in the water.
On top of that, things back in Europe were getting incredibly tense. France was staring down the barrel of another huge war with Great Britain. Now, Napoleon was a genius military mind, and he knew perfectly well that he couldn't defend a vast, untamed transatlantic wilderness from the vastly superior British Navy. Plus, wars are expensive, really expensive. He desperately needed hard cash, specifically gold, to fund his upcoming European military campaigns. So, selling Louisiana magically solved 2 massive problems at once, shedding an indefensible territory and filling his war chest.
All right, Section 3, the constitutional crisis. So, word of this massive $15 million mega deal reaches Washington, and Thomas Jefferson, he is suddenly sweating. He finds himself trapped in a huge personal and legal paradox. See, Jefferson was famous for being a strict constructionist. That means he firmly believed the federal government could only do what was explicitly written down in the Constitution. If it wasn't on the page, the president couldn't do it. No exceptions. And the massive problem here was that the U.S. Constitution said absolutely nothing about a president having the authority to purchase foreign territory.
In the end, though, he swallowed his pride. The deal was simply too good to pass up for the survival and growth of the nation. Jefferson ended up using his executive power to make treaties as a workaround to push the deal through the Senate. And by doing so, he permanently cemented the doctrine of implied powers. This is the idea that the government actually does have powers not explicitly written down, as long as they are necessary to run the country. The great irony here is that to double the nation's size, Jefferson literally had to break his own most rigid political philosophy.
Take a look at the sheer scale of this thing. It's absolutely brilliant. Before 1803, the western border of the U.S. was the Mississippi River. After, bam, the Rocky Mountains. The physical size of the country ballooned from roughly 890,000 square miles to over 1.7 million, and all for $15 million, which, to put it in perspective, is about $350 million today. The U.S. gained the land that would eventually make up parts or all of 15 future states, including places like Missouri, Kansas, and Oklahoma.
Moving on to Section 4, the unintended harvest.
Now, this massive expansion wasn't just a clean-cut real estate swap. It planted the seeds for some incredibly complex and, frankly, dark long-term consequences. For starters, this acquisition provided the geographic canvas that completely changed American identity. It sparked that powerful, driving belief in manifest destiny, the idea that the United States was naturally destined, even ordained, to expand from the Atlantic coast all the way to the Pacific coast. It completely reframed how the nation viewed its future and its borders.
But we really have to talk about the human cost on the ground here. Older history books love to frame this as a peaceful real estate deal between two white empires. But the reality? This land was actively populated by dozens of sovereign Native American nations. The purchase essentially kicked off a tragic century of forced displacement, broken treaties, and systemic erasure. The United States bought the title to the land from France, sure, but the ground reality was a brutal, century-long campaign to remove the people who were actually living there.
And if that wasn't enough, this purchase essentially lit a slow-burning fuse for the American Civil War. Think about it. Suddenly you have all this new land, and it forces a massive, explosive question: would slavery be allowed in these vast new Western territories? Every single time a new state was carved out of the Louisiana Territory, it triggered bitter, furious congressional battles over the balance of power between free and slave states. It was a fuse that inevitably exploded into war in 1861. The purchase gave the nation room to grow, absolutely, but it also provided the exact battleground that nearly destroyed it.
Finally, Section 5, a new maritime rival.
Wrapping up the legacy of this whole ordeal, we hit this incredibly chilling final irony. Napoleon wasn't flying blind here. He knew exactly the kind of chain reaction he was setting into motion on the geopolitical chessboard. Right upon signing the treaty, he made this incredible remark. He said, "This accession of territory affirms forever the power of the United States, and I have just given to England a maritime rival that sooner or later will lay low her pride." He correctly predicted that by selling this land and ensuring America's massive future wealth, he was permanently creating a giant maritime rival to haunt his British enemies for centuries to come. And you know what? He was absolutely right.
So I'll leave you with this final thought. When you look back at this entire accidental domino effect, from a simple need for farmers to float crops down a river, to a slave revolt in Haiti, to a constitutional crisis, and eventually to a devastating civil war, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other massive historical shifts began simply because someone panicked over needing just a little more room to maneuver? Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning those quiet little moments that rewrite the entire map.